This is the Enigma Escape. It's the second generation of a do-it-all titanium commuter, adventure bike, gravel bike, road bike, whatever you want it to be. This is a blank canvas for your cycling desires. Enigma will build you one of these pretty much however you want. You can have a frame set, but this particular bike is very excitingly built with a complete Shimano GRX gravel-specific group set, and it's the Ultegra equivalent RX 800 components. That's the levers, the derailleurs, and the cranks. The Enigma is a very simple, practical frame set. Apart from the front brake hose that disappears into the fork, all of the cables and hoses are completely external, which makes working on this bike very easy and building it up as well. There are mounts everywhere on this bike. You can carry all the luggage you want, you can fit proper mud guards, you can put everything cages on the fork if you want to carry canisters of gas or large bottles of wine. The world is your oyster with this bike. There's nothing too modern, complex or proprietary about this bike. No weird standards to catch you out when it comes to replacing parts. It's a completely standard threaded bottom bracket, very normal semi-integrated headset. Obviously this is a bike with disc brakes and it's got modern flat mount calipers and through axles, but other than that there's nothing about it that screams cutting edge and modern. It's just good solid stuff. This build features Shimano's Ultegra level GRX gravel specific components, so the rear derailleur is like a road Ultegra derailleur, but it's got a clutch, which means less bouncing around of the chain. The front derailleur is also very similar, but it matches the slightly wider chain line of the GRX cranks. The gearing is distinctly gravel friendly as well. That's a 46-30 on the front and an 11-34 cassette, which is essentially a mountain bike ratio. Enigma has built this bike with Hunt's 4-season gravel disc wheel set, which, like all Hunt wheels, is a tubeless ready set. There's a nice wide alloy rim profile, and they're built to withstand the rigours of horrible British riding. The finishing kit on this bike is Enigma's own branded stuff. You might notice that this has what essentially looks like a road handlebar, and that's because it is a road handlebar. Enigma gave me the option of a more flared, gravelly looking one, but as I've said in previous videos, I'm not a huge fan of flared bars, and if I'm speccing a gravel bike as a kind of do-it-all machine that's going to spend quite a lot of time on tarmac as well as on trails, I quite like a conventional set of drop bars. This bike weighs about 9.3 kilos for a 54 in this spec, which is pretty respectably light for a bike that's made out of metal and which has disc brakes and aluminium wheels. Without lapsing into horrible riding cliches, I would call the ride quality of the Escape quite analogue. This isn't a bike that's got any wacky suspension features built into it. It has a conventional handlebar unlike a certain German manufacturer, and really, apart from the fact that it's got quite large clearances and disc brakes, it doesn't look radically different to a titanium road bike from a few years ago. The geometry is not road bike aggressive though. This has a reach figure of 371mm, which is reasonably short for a medium, and a stack figure of 583, which is really quite tall. Your perception of the ride quality of a bike like this will probably come down quite a lot to exactly how you build it, like how big the tyres are and how much air you put in them. Slightly surprisingly, this bike has a 31.6mm seat post, which does mean that there's less flex at the back than perhaps you might expect. Most bikes in this category these days come with a 27.2, and thinner things inherently bend more. Having said that, with big tyres you can run them at really low pressures, and there's huge scope to tune the ride quality of this bike. There's also a little concession to comfort in the fact that the seat stays aren't straight. They have a nice little curve in them, which I'm sure adds bags of flex to the rear end. In any case, I wouldn't call this the most cosseting of rides, but at the same time it's certainly not harsh, and the frame itself is quite springy in the way that titanium frames often are. The way this bike is built, with this choice of bar and the double crank, it's quite a road-oriented setup, and that naturally appeals to me as I'm kind of a road rider first. The nice thing of course is you can jump off the road onto a trail and this thing's not going to be totally out of its depth. The double gearing means that you've got enough range at both ends that you can get up really quite hard climbs, because that 30-34 low gear is properly low, but you're not going to be totally spun out on the road because the big gear is there too. Tyres are a huge factor in determining how well a gravel bike performs. These are Panaracer Gravel King SKs in 40mm. These are probably better suited to a kind of dry, dusty American style gravel riding, or the kind of conditions that you get in the summer in the UK. This winter we've been beset by rain. A lot of the trails have just turned into bog, and these are completely out of their depth in actual mud because they have absolutely no ability to bite and you'll just wheel spin everywhere. But I mean, that's just the compromise of having different tyres. For me, a big part of the appeal of a bike like this is the timeless quality of titanium. There are all these cliches about buying a bike for life, which really nobody does, or the supposed magic carpet ride of titanium. But there is no question that titanium doesn't age in the way that other bikes tend to, because fundamentally titanium bikes look exactly like they did 20 years ago. If you put modern components on an old titanium frame or vintage components on this one, there wouldn't be a huge difference other than the fact that obviously this has disc brakes and through axles. As a frame material for the rough and tumble of gravel, titanium has its appeal as well, because it offers much of the resilience of steel without quite as much weight. But you're not going to worry about this frame in the same way that you might about a carbon one if you drop it on a rocky section of trail. It's also an undeniably pretty frame. It's got lovely subtle logos, it's got very nice cowled dropouts, and the colour of titanium just looks somewhat luxurious compared to other materials. This bike, built like this, costs about £3,500 in the UK, but as I say, Enigma will do you all sorts of different builds, or you can buy a frame set for a little bit over £2,000. You could quite reasonably argue that that's quite a lot of money for a bike that doesn't have the technological flourishes of some of the similarly priced competition. The big names are making very fancy carbon bikes with all sorts of proprietary frame and suspension technology that you can buy for similar money. But the reality is that some people don't want those things. They want a classic looking bike that has the versatility that the Enigma offers. If I were looking for a single do-it-all bike, say to accompany a very racy road bike, something like this would be on my radar. So I'd have the fancy carbon super light thing for sunny days when I'm riding up smooth tarmac, and then I'd have this for every other riding condition, whether that's taking it off-road and doing a bit of gravel, or riding on the road in the winter with full mud guards, or doing a little bit of touring, or any of the other things that you would do on a bike with a bit of utility about it. You could do all of those things on a much cheaper bike, but you'll probably feel smugger if you do them on a bike like this, because it's very lovely. Could you justify spending this much money for what is essentially a very simple bike? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please hit that little bell icon so you get notified about all of our videos.